Well, it's time to look at another Marvel crossover event. This one's from 2011 and features Thor and the Asgardians. Gee, it's in 2011. Wonder why it would feature Thor and the Asgardians. It also features some of the actions of longtime Captain America's nemesis, the Red Skull, back in World War II. Gee, I wonder why we deal with Captain America in World War II. I'm sure the idea will come to me at some point. Anyway, here's Fear itself.
A craft carrying Sin, the daughter of the Red Skull, and Baron Zemo arrive at a desert fortress that once belonged to the Red Skull. After making their way through several booby traps, the two enter a chamber containing a book bound in Atlantean flesh. Sin states that the book is the Skull's greatest failure.
First appearing in Captain America issue number 290, Cynthia Schmidt has been artificially aged, brainwashed, de-aged, deprogrammed, then aged normally, reprogrammed, and eventually she wound up being disfigured, leaving her with an appearance very similar to that of her father. She's got a wonderful personality. Now her partner in crime, Baron Helmut Zemo, is the son of the original Baron Heinrich Zemo. Helmut has been a long-time thorn in the side of Captain America and the Avengers. He's led groups such as the Masters of Evil and the supervillain-turned-superhero team known as the Thunderbolts.
Flashing back to World War II, the Red Skull has sacrificed several Atlanteans at the behest of the religious sect known as the Thule Society, in an attempt to bring an object of mystical power to Earth. However, the object doesn't land where the skull is located, and the object is tracked to Antarctica, where neither the skull nor his men can seem to move it. The Red Skull leaves several people behind with orders to guard the object until Hitler himself arrives to use it. Back in the present, Sin explains that she knows what the object is and its purpose. She then turns on Zemo and abandons him out in the desert. Meanwhile, in New York City, Steve Rogers and Sharon Carter try to keep over a group protesting something. Either way, a riot soon breaks out.
It should be noted that in the wake of the Siege event, Steve Rogers inherited the title of Secretary of Defense from the dethroned Norman Osborn, who inherited it from the dethroned Tony Stark. Steve Rogers would relinquish his title as Captain America to his former sidekick, James Buchanan Bucky Barnes, aka the Winter Soldier.
Afterwards, Rogers and the other Avengers are slightly upset to learn that there was no real villain influence over the riot. It was just merely a riot. Tony Stark then explains that his company, Stark Resilient, is working on building a new Asgard in Oklahoma, and it would look good for the Avengers and the Asgardians to stand together for the announcement.
You may remember back when I discussed Avengers Disassembled, that Thor's tie-in series culminated in the character's death. Well, death not exactly being a very permanent thing in comics, the character would return a few years later in the wake of Marvel's Civil War event. Now, upon his return, he wound up resurrecting the Palace of Asgard just outside of the small town of Broxton, Oklahoma, and he would travel the world finding the reincarnations of various Norse gods, returning them to their god status, and then those gods slowly began to return to Broxton, Oklahoma. During the Marvel Siege event, the Palace of Asgard and much of Broxton wound up being destroyed.
Back with Sin, she leads her forces on an assault against the Nazi outpost in Antarctica. Slaughtering everyone in their path, the group makes their way to the chamber containing the artifact. Upon entering the chamber, they find a hammer with Norse runes etched on it. Sin reaches out and takes his hold of the hammer. She then becomes possessed by the spirit of Skowie. At Stark's press conference outside of Broxton, Thor takes notice of his father Odin's absence. Odin's reasons are simple. He knows Skaui has been awakened, and the end is nigh. Later at a party, Odin appears and, despite Thor's protests, reassembles the Bifrost and leads the Norse gods back to Asgard's original home. Meanwhile, Skaui makes her way to the bottom of the Mariana Trench. She fights off 3 serpent guardians of a tomb. Entering the tomb, Skaui awakens her Allfather, the Midgard serpent.
Now, Sky, yes, that is how it's pronounced, is a Jotun, or giant from Norse mythology, often associated with skiing and bow hunting. One of her more noteworthy adventures came during the Lokasana, in which she placed 2 venomous snakes above the face of an imprisoned Loki. What does this have to do with fear itself? I don't really know. To the best of my ability, they probably just wanted to go with a lesser-known Norse mythological figure.
The Midgard serpent summons the Worthy. Several objects then appear in space and crash into the Earth. Later, at the Raft Prison, headquarters of the Thunderbolts, the Juggernaut is finishing up his workout when one of the objects crashes into the prison. Among the wreckage, the Juggernaut reaches out and touches the object. He is then transformed into Kurth, Breaker of Stone. In Brazil, a vacationing Bruce Banner and Betty Ross notice an object crashing in the rainforest. The two Hulk out.
Yeah, Bruce Banner's longtime love interest, Betty Ross, is a Hulk now. It's a story that's way too convoluted to explain here.
Coming to the hammer's resting spot, the Hulk reaches for it and becomes transformed into Null, Breaker of Worlds. Elsewhere, Avengers villains Titania and Crusher Creel, the Absorbing Man, come into contact with the falling hammers and become Skirn, Breaker of Men, and Greoth, Breaker of Wills. Also, Atlantean supervillain Atuma becomes Nekod, Breaker of Oceans. Thor, adversary of the Great Gargoyle, then becomes Malk, Breaker of Faith.
Of those last 4 I mentioned, only Titania's transformation actually happens in the main Fear Itself series. Absorbing Man and Great Gargoyle both happen in tie-in issues, and Atuma just gets this weird throwaway panel where he's got a hammer. Why? Because they wanted to sell tie-ins. And I refer back to my Secret Invasion review for the stupidity in that.
Finally, a hammer comes down on Yancey Street in Manhattan's Lower East Side, birthplace of Ben Grimm, the ever-loving blue-eyed thing of the Fantastic Four. While the FF inspects the hammer, Grimm reaches out and touches it, and is transformed to Angrir, Breaker of Souls. Back with the Norse gods, they finally return to the original place of Asgard. Odin immediately begins ordering the construction of an Asgardian war machine. Thor continues to protest and gets imprisoned by Odin for his efforts. Later, Loki...
Yeah, sorry fangirls, at this point Loki was a small boy. Take comfort, before that he was a woman.
Loki breaks Thor out and leads him to a team consisting of Sif, the Warriors 3, Fandral, Hogan, and Volstagg, and Hermod, the Norse messenger. Odin happens upon the group and explains that it's best to let the Earth be destroyed and to best prepare Asgard for defense. Thor disagrees, so Odin sends him back to Earth to die with his chosen people. Back on Earth, the Midgard Serpent unleashes his forces on the world. Skaui attacks Washington, D.C., Captain America, aka Bucky, Black Widow, and the Falcon try their best to defend the nation's capital. Cap puts up a good fight, but Skaui gains the upper hand. She rips off Cap's artificial arm and fires a lightning bolt through his chest. Black Widow and Falcon do their best to save Cap, but it's not enough. Captain America is dead. Again. For like the 4th time. Thor returns to Broxton, only to receive a hostile response from the locals, so he leaves. He manages to reconnect with the Avengers just as Steve Rogers reassumes the mantle of Captain America in the wake of Bucky's death. Thor explains who the Midgard Serpent is to the Avengers. The Midgard Serpent, or Jormungand, is a being who gains strength through spreading fear and hatred. Also, he and Thor are prophesied to mutually eliminate each other in the Battle of Ragnarok.
This is actually true to the Norse myth. Thor and the Jormungand are destined to destroy each other in battle. I've tried to hesitate using the term Ragnarok too much in this because this is like the fourth or fifth Ragnarok we've had in the Thor comics. Thor Disassembled was a Ragnarok. The Surtur Saga was a Ragnarok. And I know I'm missing a few. Look, this is the equivalent of every time you tried to read Marvel's Hercules series, he had to always undergo 12 labors. Just because it's the most well-known story featuring these gods doesn't mean it has to be adapted every time a new writer takes over a Thor story.
Cap splits the group up. Thor is dispatched to Antarctica to take on the Jormungand. Iron Man is sent to Broxton to try to contact Odin, and Cap joins the other adventurers in New York City to take on Skaui and her forces. In Antarctica, Thor begins to square off with the Jormungand. It doesn't go well, as the Jormungand has absorbed too much power. He blasts Thor all the way back to New York City. The Jormungand then elevates his fortress. In Broxton, Iron Man calls out Odin, noting he needs to sacrifice something to earn the god's respect. Tony sacrifices his sobriety.
Tony Stark's brand of wine is called Demon in a Bottle. Do you get it?
Odin comes out and Stark explains that he's not asking for Odin's direct assistance. Whenever a war breaks out, Tony Stark makes weapons, and right now he wants permission to make Asgardian weapons. In New York City, Thor winds up engaging Null, the Hulk, and Angrier, the Thing, in battle. The two possessed heroes dominate the early portion of the fight until Thor is able to bring his hammer Mjolnir through Angrier. Literally. He then hits Null so hard he flies into orbit. Back with Cap and the other Avengers, Skaui dominates much of the battle with Cap continuously fighting back. That is until the Jormungand arrives. Cap throws his shield at the Jormungand, only for the serpent to shatter it. The Jormungand then smashes his hammer into the ground, unleashing a massive wave of destruction. Meanwhile, a dying Ben Grimm, having regained his identity, makes his way to the Baxter Building, headquarters of the Fantastic Four. There, Reed and Sue's two children, Franklin and Valeria Richards, begin tending to him as he apologizes for his actions.
Franklin Richards is the son of Reed and Sue Richards of the Fantastic Four. He's a mutant with reality warping powers. In fact, at one point he actually created his own pocket Marvel Universe, which led into Marvel's Heroes Reborn event. Now, his sister Valeria Richards has kind of a unique backstory. When Sue was initially pregnant with her, it resulted in a miscarriage. However, Franklin was able to use his reality warping abilities to later restore Sue's pregnancy. Unfortunately, there were complications with the birth, and longtime FF foe Dr. Doom had to step in to help Sue deliver the baby. In gratitude, Doom was allowed to name the child after his longtime love.
Franklin uses his powers to revive and restore Ben. Back with Captain America, he comes to after the fight with the Jormungand. He tells the other Avengers to stand down, and admits defeat. The Avengers carry a physically exhausted Thor towards the wreckage of Avengers Tower. There's a portal to Asgard located in the wreckage. After some of the Avengers stay behind in New York City to help clean up, Cap leads a small group into Asgard with Thor. In Asgard, Cap and Odin squabble, which results in the group of Avengers being sent back to Broxton, Oklahoma, though Odin takes Thor back to his chambers to recuperate. As he recovers, Thor and Odin talk. Odin tries to talk Thor into not fighting the Jormungand, but Thor states that saving the Earth is more important than his living. Odin gives in and bestows upon Thor the All-Father's own personal armor and the sword, Ragnarok. Thor and Odin then journey into the Dwarven Mines, where Tony has crafted specific Uru weapons for each Avenger. Odin then blesses the weapons. Back in Broxton, Oklahoma, the Jormungand and his forces begin their move on the remains of Asgard, the Earth-based one. Cap tells the other Avengers to wait for Iron Man and Thor. Then he goes and joins up with a small militia to lead the charge against the forces of evil. Thor and Iron Man return. Iron Man explains the purpose of the weapons to each Avenger, except for Cap, whose shield should be able to withstand anything. Except Cap's shield was already destroyed. The Avengers join the battle and the tide slowly begins to turn. As he fights the Jormungand, Thor loses Mjolnir. This enables Captain America to pick it up.
The enchantment that Odin placed on Thor's mystical hammer Mjolnir has deemed Captain America worthy of wielding it on several occasions. This is why in one of the Avengers Age of Ultron trailers, where there's this little contest where several members of the group are trying to pick up Mjolnir, Cap is actually able to sort of wiggle it a little.
Odin begins to lead his forces to Earth. They arrive just as Thor delivers the killing blow to the Jormungand. The worthies' hammers are ripped away from them and they return from whence they came. Thor and the Jormungand then plummet to the Earth below. The Asgardians and the Avengers make their way towards the crash site. Upon arriving, Thor manages to get to his feet, only to collapse into Odin's arms, where he dies. Later, Odin takes the corpse of the Jormungand to Asgard and exiles the other Norse gods to Earth. This way, he and only he can truly contain the evil.
Thor would later return to the land of the living in a tie-in issue that served as an epilogue to this series. However, that issue was not included in the trade proper for Fear itself, so I couldn't really cover it that well. Anyway, again, I point to the stupidity of putting something that could easily be done in the main series into a tie-in issue just to boost sales for that tie-in issue. I really don't like it. And because of that, I am going to give Fear itself a very low B. Admittedly, tie-in nitpicks aside, the series is pretty good. It's very tight, good writing, great artwork. The story is padded out a little. Again, maybe we could have taken out some of that padding and put some of those tie-in issues into the series proper. This would have been an A easy, but unfortunately I gotta lower it for that. And with that, let's see what we'll be doing next time on the Random Trade Review. Grab two there. We finally have our first DC title!
Join us on Monday, March 3rd for Green Arrow, Quiver,